What if I told you that sometimes the most life-changing moments come disguised as ordinary Tuesday nights? That the person who saves you might be the one you least expect? This is the story of how a broken man's world was forever altered by 8 pounds of dirty laundry and a little girl who refused to give up hope. Picture this, it's 11:47 p.m. on a cold October night in Bridgeton, a town so small it barely registers on most maps. While most people are tucked safely in their beds, Sheriff Tom Hollis sits in his patrol car, nursing his fourth cup of coffee and wondering how his life became an endless cycle of empty nights and hollow days. At 53, Tom has the kind of weathered face that tells stories of loss, regret, and a heart that stopped believing in second chances 7 years ago. But tonight, something is different. Tonight, Tom is about to witness something that will shake him to his very core and challenge everything he thought he knew about hope, family, and what it means to truly save someone. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's 24-hour laundromat cast long shadows across the deserted street, creating an almost ethereal glow against the darkness. Most people see it as just another mundane fixture in their sleepy town, a place where college students do their washing at odd hours and shift workers grab a quick load before heading home. But for Tom, it's become something else entirely, a mystery that's been eating at him for weeks. You see, every night for the past month, Tom has noticed something peculiar. A small figure, barely visible in the dim light, making its way toward the laundromat's entrance just before midnight. At first, he convinced himself it was his imagination, the result of too many sleepless nights and too much caffeine. But as the sightings continued, Tom realized this wasn't a trick of the light or his mind playing games with him. It was a child, a little girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with carefully braided hair and clothes that seemed to swallow her small frame. She carried with her a worn backpack and moved with the kind of careful precision that spoke of someone far too young to be navigating the world alone at such an hour. Now, you might be wondering why a seasoned sheriff wouldn't immediately investigate such an obvious cause for concern. But Tom's story is more complicated than that. You see, Tom Hollis wasn't always the solitary figure he'd become. Once upon a time, he was a family man, a loving husband to Sarah and a devoted father to their daughter Emily. They lived in a beautiful house on Maple Street, complete with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Buddy. But life has a way of shattering our carefully constructed worlds in the most unexpected ways. 7 years ago, on a rainy Thursday evening, Tom's entire universe collapsed in a matter of seconds. Sarah and Emily were driving home from Emily's piano recital. She'd played Chopin's Minute Waltz beautifully, earning a standing ovation from the small audience. Tom was supposed to be with them, but he'd been called away on what seemed like an urgent case at the last minute. The drunk driver who ran the red light never saw them coming. The impact was so severe that both Sarah and Emily were killed instantly. Tom arrived at the scene to find his entire reason for living scattered across the intersection like broken glass. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his career protecting others, yet he couldn't protect the two people who mattered most to him in the world. The guilt nearly destroyed him. If he'd been there, if he'd driven them home himself, if he'd insisted they wait for him, the what-ifs became a relentless chorus in his mind. His colleagues watched helplessly as Tom withdrew from the world, declining social invitations, avoiding family gatherings, and eventually requesting permanent assignment to the night shift. The darkness became his companion, the solitude his shield against a world that had taken everything from him. For years, Tom went through the motions of living without actually being alive. He showed up for work, did his job competently, and went home to an empty house that still smelled faintly of Sarah's perfume and echoed with Emily's laughter. He kept their rooms exactly as they'd left them, unable to pack away the remnants of his former life yet tormented by their constant presence. But something about this mysterious little girl began to crack open the wall Tom had built around his heart. Maybe it was the way she moved with such quiet determination, or how she seemed to carry herself with a dignity that belied her obvious vulnerability. Whatever it was, Tom found himself thinking about her long after his shift ended, wondering where she came from and why she was out there alone in the darkness. The first time Tom actually spoke to her, it was completely by accident. He'd been sitting in his usual spot across from the laundromat, watching through the windows as she methodically sorted through her small collection of clothes, when his radio crackled to life. A domestic disturbance call 3 blocks away required his immediate attention. As he started his engine, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. The little girl was leaving the laundromat, struggling with her heavy backpack. Without thinking, Tom rolled down his window. "Hey there," he called out gently, not wanting to startle her. "You okay?" The girl froze like a deer in headlights, her wide eyes reflecting the streetlight as she turned toward his voice. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, in the smallest voice imaginable, she whispered, "Yes, sir," before quickly disappearing around the corner. That brief exchange haunted Tom for days. The fear in her voice, the way she'd instinctively backed away from his patrol car, it all pointed to a child who'd learned to be afraid of authority figures. But why? What circumstances had led her to this point? Tom began to alter his patrol routes, finding excuses to drive past the laundromat more frequently. He started timing his breaks to coincide with her nightly visits, watching from a distance as she went about her routine with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been doing this for far too long. The more Tom observed, the more questions arose. The girl, he'd started thinking of her as his little mystery, always arrived alone and always left alone. She seemed to know exactly which machines to use, how much detergent to add, and how long each cycle would take. But most troubling of all, she never seemed to have anyone waiting for her or checking on her welfare. It was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who owned the apartment above the laundromat, who finally provided Tom with his first real clue. During one of his regular wellness checks on the senior residents of his beat, Mrs. Patterson mentioned seeing that poor little colored girl night after night. "She's there every evening, Sheriff," Mrs. Patterson had said, her voice filled with concern. "Always by herself, always with that same little bag. I've offered her cookies, even invited her up for some hot chocolate, but she just shakes her head and goes back to her washing. It breaks my heart to see a child out there all alone like that." The pieces began to fall into place in Tom's mind, forming a picture he desperately hoped was wrong. A child doing laundry alone at midnight wasn't just unusual, it was a red flag signaling something much more serious. But Tom had learned the hard way that jumping to conclusions could be dangerous, especially when dealing with vulnerable populations. He decided to conduct his own informal investigation, starting with the laundromat's owner, Mr. Murphy, a gruff but kind-hearted man who'd been running the business for over 30 years. When Tom casually brought up the subject of late-night customers, Murphy's expression grew thoughtful. "You mean little Imani?" Murphy said, surprising Tom with the fact that he knew her name. "Sweet kid. Never causes any trouble. Always has exact change. Always cleans up after herself. Been coming here for months now. Maybe longer. Never seen her with any adults though, which I'll admit has me wondering." Imani. Finally, Tom had a name to go with the face that had been occupying his thoughts. But having a name only made her seem more real, more human, and somehow more vulnerable. It also raised new questions. Where did she live? Who was responsible for her care? And most importantly, why was she doing laundry alone in the middle of the night? Tom's investigation led him to canvass the neighborhood around the laundromat, speaking with residents, shop owners, and anyone else who might have noticed Imani's nightly routine. What he discovered painted a troubling picture of a child who existed on the margins of society, visible to many but truly seen by few. The owner of the corner store remembered her buying small amounts of food, crackers, peanut butter, juice boxes, always paying with crumpled bills and loose change. The night security guard at the nearby office building had seen her walking the streets but assumed she was with family nearby. A taxi driver mentioned giving her a ride once, but she'd gotten out several blocks away and walked into the darkness. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, but none provided the answers Tom desperately needed. It was becoming clear that Imani was more than just a child with unconventional laundry habits. She was a little girl navigating a world that had somehow failed to provide her with the basic safety and security every child deserved. The breakthrough came on a particularly cold Thursday night in November. Tom had positioned himself in his usual observation spot when he noticed something different about Imani's behavior. Instead of her typical efficient routine, she seemed to be moving more slowly, pausing frequently to rest. When she stumbled slightly while carrying her bag, Tom's protective instincts overrode his caution. He parked his car and walked across the street, pushing open the laundromat's door with the gentle chime of the bell announcing his arrival. Imani looked up from the washing machine she'd been loading, her eyes widening with a mixture of recognition and apprehension. "Hi, Imani," Tom said softly, remembering to use her name. "I'm Sheriff Hollis. I've seen you here before, and I wanted to make sure you're okay." For a moment, Imani simply stared at him, her small hands gripping the edge of the washing machine. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "That's very smart," Tom replied, crouching down to her level. "Your parents taught you well. Are they here with you tonight?" The question seemed to hit Imani like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, Tom thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "I don't have parents," she said with a matter-of-fact tone that was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "It's just me now." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that Tom felt deep in his chest. This wasn't the response of a child who was temporarily separated from her guardians. This was the statement of someone who had learned to navigate the world entirely on her own. "Imani," Tom said gently, "can you tell me where you live? Where you go when you're not here?" Imani's eyes darted around the laundromat as if looking for an escape route. "Different places," she said finally. "I move around a lot." Tom's heart broke a little more with each word. The picture forming in his mind was of a child without a home, without family, without the basic safety net that most people took for granted. But he also recognized the strength in her voice, the resilience that had allowed her to survive in circumstances that would challenge most adults. "Are you hungry?" Tom asked, remembering the snacks he always kept in his patrol car. "I have some granola bars if you'd like one." Imani hesitated, then nodded slightly. As Tom went to retrieve the food, he noticed how Imani's eyes tracked his every movement, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. When he returned with the granola bars and a bottle of water, she accepted them with a quiet thank you that was filled with genuine gratitude. As Imani ate, Tom sat quietly nearby, not wanting to overwhelm her with questions but desperate to understand her situation. Finally, she looked up at him with those deep, intelligent eyes and asked, "Are you going to take me somewhere?" The question was asked with such calm resignation that Tom realized this wasn't Imani's first encounter with authority figures. She'd been through this before: the questions, the concern, the promises of help that somehow never materialized into lasting change. "I don't want to take you anywhere you don't want to go," Tom said honestly, "but I am worried about you. It's not safe for someone your age to be out alone at night. Is there anyone, a relative, a friend, anyone, who could help you?" Imani shook her head slowly. "Mama died," she said simply. "She got sick and then she died. We came here from Haiti for a better life. But then she got sick and couldn't work anymore. After she died, I didn't know what to do. I was scared they would send me back. So I just stayed hidden." The story poured out of her in fragments, how she and her mother had come to America with hopes and dreams, how illness had derailed their plans, how the adult world had failed to catch a falling child. Tom listened with growing horror and admiration, horror at the circumstances that had led to this moment, and admiration for the incredible strength this little girl had shown in surviving on her own. "How long have you been by yourself?" Tom asked gently. Imani shrugged. "I don't know. A long time. Since before it got cold." Tom realized she was talking about months, not days or weeks. This child had been fending for herself through an entire season change, finding ways to stay warm, fed, and clean while remaining invisible to the systems designed to protect her. "Where do you sleep?" Tom asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. Imani's eyes dropped to the floor. "Here." Sometimes, when it's really cold, Mr. Murphy doesn't know, but the machines keep it warm. And it's safe. The admission hit Tom like a physical blow. This child had been sleeping in a laundromat, using the warmth of the dryers to keep from freezing, all while maintaining the facade of normal laundry activities to avoid detection. The ingenuity was remarkable, but the circumstances were heartbreaking. Imani, Tom said softly, you don't have to live like this. There are people who can help, who want to help. You're not alone anymore. For the first time since he'd known her, Tom saw Imani's carefully constructed composure crack. Tears began to flow down her cheeks as she whispered, I don't want to be alone anymore. I'm tired of being scared all the time. In that moment, Tom felt something shift inside him. A wall he'd built around his heart began to crumble. Looking at this brave little girl, he saw not just a child in need, but a reflection of his own pain and isolation. They were both survivors, both carrying wounds that had shaped their relationship with the world. You don't have to be scared anymore, Tom said, meaning every word. And you definitely don't have to be alone. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Tom didn't just call social services or follow protocol. He opened his heart to the possibility of healing, of second chances, of the kind of love that can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The process of becoming Imani's guardian wasn't simple. There were legal hurdles, psychological evaluations, and endless paperwork. But Tom approached each obstacle with the same determination he'd once brought to his police work. This wasn't just about helping a child in need, it was about rebuilding his own capacity for hope and connection. The first night Imani stayed in Tom's house, she slept on the couch in the living room, her small bag of belongings clutched tightly to her chest. Tom lay awake in his bedroom, listening to the sounds of another person in his home for the first time in 7 years. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Over the following weeks, Tom watched Imani slowly begin to trust that this new situation was real and permanent. She started leaving her bag unpacked for longer periods, venturing into different rooms of the house, and eventually accepting Tom's offer to help her pick out some new clothes and toys. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Imani had nightmares, moments of panic when she couldn't find Tom, and periods of withdrawal when the weight of her experiences became too heavy to bear. But she also began to show glimpses of the child she might have been under different circumstances, curious, funny, and incredibly resilient. Tom, meanwhile, found himself rediscovering parts of himself he thought were gone forever. Teaching Imani to ride a bike, helping her with homework, and tucking her in at night brought back memories of his time with Emily, not the painful, guilt-ridden memories he'd carried for years, but warm, loving remembrances of what it meant to be a father. The legal adoption process took nearly a year, but when the judge finally declared them a family in the eyes of the law, both Tom and Imani wept with joy. In the courtroom that day, surrounded by the social workers, lawyers, and advocates who had made their journey possible, Tom realized that saving Imani had actually saved him too. But their story didn't end with the adoption decree. Over the years that followed, Tom and Imani built a life together that honored both their past experiences and their shared future. They created new traditions while respecting the memories of those they'd lost. They learned to navigate the challenges of their unique family structure while celebrating the love that had brought them together. Imani excelled in school, participated in sports, and developed friendships with other children. But she never forgot where she came from or the lessons she'd learned during her time alone. She became an advocate for homeless youth, using her story to help others understand the faces behind the statistics. Tom, meanwhile, found renewed purpose in his work as a sheriff. His experience with Imani had given him new insights into the challenges faced by vulnerable populations, and he became a champion for community programs designed to help at-risk youth. He never forgot that sometimes the most important calls weren't the ones that came over the radio, but the ones that came from paying attention to the world around him. Years later, when people asked Tom about the night he found Imani at the laundromat, he would tell them it was the moment his real life began, not because his previous life hadn't mattered, but because it was the moment he learned that love isn't a finite resource that gets depleted by loss, it's a renewable force that grows stronger when shared. And Imani? She would tell you that the night she met Tom was the night she stopped being afraid of the dark. Because sometimes, when you're lost in the darkness, all it takes is one person with a flashlight to show you the way home. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that families come in all shapes and sizes, that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places, like a laundromat on a Tuesday night, where a broken man and a brave little girl found exactly what they needed in each other. The fluorescent lights still buzz at Murphy's 24-hour laundromat, casting the same ethereal glow across the quiet streets of Bridgeton. But now, when Tom drives past during his evening patrol, he sees it differently, not as a place of mystery and concern, but as the location where two lost souls found their way to each other. And every year on the anniversary of that first conversation, Tom and Imani return to that laundromat, not to do laundry, but to remember, to honor the journey that brought them together and to celebrate the family they've built from the ashes of their separate heartbreaks. Because sometimes, the most beautiful things in life emerge from the most unexpected places, and sometimes, the person who saves you is the one who needed saving too. In the end, this isn't just a story about a sheriff and a homeless girl. It's a story about the power of human connection, the resilience of the human spirit, and the extraordinary things that can happen when we open our hearts to the possibility of love in all its forms. It's a story that reminds us to pay attention to the small moments, the quiet struggles, and the vulnerable souls who move through our world hoping someone will notice. Because you never know when your simple act of kindness might be the thing that changes everything, not just for them, but for you too. So the next time you see someone who seems out of place, someone who might need help, don't look away. Take a closer look. Ask a question. Offer a hand. Because buried in that moment of connection might be the beginning of something beautiful, a story of healing, hope, and the kind of love that transforms lives. After all, we're all just walking each other home. And sometimes, the most important journey begins with a single step towards someone who needs to know they're not alone in the darkness. This is the story of Tom and Imani, a sheriff and his daughter, bound not by blood but by choice, love, and the unbreakable understanding that family is what we make it. And in a world that can sometimes feel cold and uncaring, their story stands as a beacon of hope, reminding us that love really can conquer all. The laundromat may have been where their story began, but it was just the first chapter in a much longer tale of two hearts finding their way to each other across the darkness. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful story of all. As the seasons turned and years passed, the impact of Tom and Imani's story rippled outward through their community in ways neither of them could have imagined. Word of their journey spread quietly at first, through the social workers who had facilitated the adoption, the teachers who watched Imani blossom in school, and the neighbors who witnessed the transformation of the once empty house on Maple Street back into a home filled with laughter and life. Tom found himself becoming an unofficial mentor to other officers who encountered situations involving vulnerable children. His experience with Imani had taught him that sometimes the most effective police work happened not with handcuffs and citations, but with patience, understanding, and the willingness to see beyond the surface of a situation. He began conducting informal training sessions for new recruits, sharing insights about recognizing signs of child homelessness and the importance of building trust with at-risk youth. His message was simple but profound: every child deserves to be seen, heard, and protected, regardless of their circumstances. The local newspaper eventually picked up their story, though Tom and Imani were careful to share only what they felt comfortable revealing. The article, titled "When Two Broken Hearts Make One Whole Family," struck a chord with readers far beyond Bridgeton's borders. Letters began arriving from across the country, from other adoptive families, from former foster children who had found their own paths to healing, and from law enforcement officers who had been inspired to look more closely at the vulnerable populations in their own communities. One letter particularly moved Tom. It came from a police officer in Oregon who had read their story and subsequently discovered a teenager living in his car in the parking lot of a 24-hour gym. Instead of treating it as a simple vagrancy case, The officer had taken the time to understand the boy's situation and had connected him with resources that ultimately led to stable housing and a return to school. Your story reminded me that sometimes the most important arrests are the ones we don't make. The officer wrote, "Thank you for showing me that our job isn't just about enforcing laws, it's about protecting the most vulnerable among us." Imani, now thriving in her teenage years, had found her own way to honor their journey. She started a peer support group at her high school for students who had experienced homelessness, foster care, or other forms of family instability. The group met weekly in a circle of trust where young people could share their experiences without judgment and find strength in their shared resilience. Imani's natural empathy and hard-won wisdom made her a powerful advocate for her peers, and the program eventually expanded to other schools in the district. During one particularly meaningful group session, a quiet freshman named Marcus shared that he had been sleeping in the school library because his family had been evicted from their apartment. Instead of offering empty platitudes, Imani listened with the kind of deep understanding that can only come from lived experience. She helped connect Marcus with school counselors and community resources. But more importantly, she showed him that his current circumstances didn't define his future. 6 months later, Marcus had stable housing and was earning grades that put him on track for college. He would later credit Imani with teaching him that seeking help wasn't a sign of weakness, but an act of courage. The ripple effects of their story continued to spread in unexpected ways. Mr. Murphy, the laundromat owner, had been so moved by learning about Imani's situation that he quietly implemented a safe space policy at his business. He trained his night staff to recognize signs of children in distress and created partnerships with local social services to ensure that any vulnerable youth who found their way to his establishment would be connected with appropriate help. A small sign by the door, written in multiple languages, simply stated, "If you need help, we're here to listen."